Now, Rachel, when it comes to Canada and certain parts of Canada that are very levered to the energy industry, pipelines are a bit of an obsession, and more so our lack of ability to build them here at home or hang our hopes on Keystone XL. So a lot of Canadians think it's a made in Canada problem, but obviously this highlights the fact that it's not a clear and easy path south of the border. I mean, what's the climate? What's the appetite for pipeline construction in the United States?
I think a lot of people are seeing that we're, running up against the end of the big pipeline build-out era, and that we may have seen the last big major oil and gas infrastructure project, or that we will in the next year or so. I think with Keystone XL, it's so interesting because this is something that Trump moved to streamline and move forward in his first week of office, and here we are 4 years later going into another U.S. presidential election, and this thing just cannot get built. So it really shows that you can have a friend in the White House, you can have a big industry effort to try to get this thing through the court, but at the end of the day, the opposition from the environmental groups, who are obviously targeting fossil fuels in general, is just so strong and so successful that building a pipeline in America and crossing borders is just becoming almost impossible.
There was an eruption of gun violence over the holiday. Hundreds shot in Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and LA. Dozens killed, including young children caught in the crossfire. An 8-year-old in Atlanta. And that's where Steve Osunsami is tonight.
The number. Of American lives shattered by gunfire over the weekend are alarming. 77 people shot. Out in Chicago, 14 of them died, including this 7-year-old. So many of the dead this weekend. Our black children. 11-year-old Devon McNeil was hit by a stray bullet on the way to a cookout in Washington, D.C. And in Atlanta, 8-year-old Sequoia Turner was killed by rounds of gunfire. Shot into a car.
Happy birthday. Did you do that? The
Verizon show that I did, performed with mannequins because I couldn't even use my band. It was great. But what was super important was donating to small businesses. And I picked Black.
Atlanta's mayor says the shooters were black and that it happened just outside this Wendy's. Parking lot where 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks was killed a month ago at the hands of a white police.
It's enough.
Well, thank you for all of that. Thank you just in general. It is always such a pleasure to talk to you. Check out Homecoming, and thank you so much, Janelle.
Enough is enough.
The burned-down restaurant has become a memorial for peaceful protests, but ever since,
doing things.
All right. I look forward to that. Season 2 of Homecoming premieres this Friday, May 22nd on Amazon Prime Video. We'll be right back with Pat Oswalt.
a group of people with long guns have taken over the area and blocked roads. Police are searching for the child's killer, and today finally moved in and took back the street.
We're fighting the enemy within. When we are shooting
each other up on our streets.
Police in New York and frankly across the country are arguing that the push for police reforms is making it harder for them to keep people safe no matter their color.
They are afraid if they're making an arrest, that if their knee goes on the back of someone.
After 225 years of Jim Beam.
And that they are fighting their life for, that they could be prosecuted.
We're looking to our future. We're crafting new bourbons. Creating new ways to drink them.
As part of Georgia's declared state of emergency, the governor is calling up 1,000 troops to
The last 225 years, we're raising Jim Beam for 225 years to come.
help and local police. He explains that the peaceful protests have been hijacked by criminals. David?
All right, Steve, thank you.
Safe driver, save 40%. Safe driver, save 40%. That's safe driver, save 40%.
It is. That's safe driver, save 40%. Right there.
It's right here. Hi. Hey.
Let me bring in my man, D. Lemon. We're both observing what's happening in this country, exposing what's wrong.
Click or call for a quote today. How crazy is new stuff crazy bread with crazy sauce? That's just stuff that's so crazy. Well, there you have it. New stuff crazy bread with crazy sauce. Just three.
Trying to shine light on what's right. In California, this is just wrong. Contra Costa.
Now there's Skyrizi. 3 out of 4 people achieve 90% clear skin at 4 months after just 2 doses. Skyrizi may increase your risk of infections and lower your ability to fight them. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms, such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or coughs, or if you plan to or recently received your vaccine.
County District Attorney's Office has charged 2 residents with 3 misdemeanor counts, including a hate crime. And here's why.
This award-winning comedy said goodbye.
The future is like a Japanese game show. You have no idea what's going on.
On July 16th, for one night only, 30 Rock returns. I want to go to there with an all-new
Yes.
all-star reunion. Why are you wearing a tux?
It's after 6. What am I, a farmer?
30 Rock, a one-time special. Thursday, July 16th.
You know, they got a permit to paint Black Lives Matter there. They got a permit. They did it legally.
Yep.
These people.
Executive Director of Rocket City Scholarship Granting Organization. We give K-12 scholarships to over 500 children in the Tennessee Valley. These scholarships allow children to receive an education that fits their learning needs. As of today, we can award less than 100 scholarships. We need your support. Visit our website to learn how to direct up to 50% of your state tax liability to our organization.
People came in and painted over it illegally. And why? Because they said there is no.
Our next guest is an Emmy Award-winning comedian you know from The King of Queens, Ratatouille, and AP Bio's latest comedy special, I Love Everything.
Such thing as racism. It ended with the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, and they said not in our town. This will not happen in my town. They said, and I played this last night, and the thing that got me, Chris, was they were painting over Black Lives Matter letters in black, which you would still be able to see because they were painting over the black letters, so they were actually, in a weird way, helping with the art there. Black Lives Matter, black paint. But listen, there can't. Now people can't get away with these things. They had to know that they would get caught, and maybe they didn't think. The guy's wearing a "Make America Great Again" hat. He's screaming those sorts of things about, I think it's like "Make America Great Again" or something of that nature. And this is where we are in this country right now. People think that they can get away and do this stuff, and that it is similar to the conversation that you were having with Angela. I guess it's related. Our country.
Movies you love to her. I'm trying to,
not your country. This is my country, my town, my city, and there are certain people who don't belong, or at least what you think that is right. You want to fight for criminal justice. You want Black Lives Matter. You want to be able to have a sign that you put on the street. You can't do that because it's my town.
And look, genius doesn't always have morality attached to it. Often it doesn't. And it all fits together, D. The lies about the pandemic, the lies about, what this president will make happen, the lies of those around him as an echo of support, the lies about what Black Lives Matter is about. It's all about creating division.
Yeah.
And making, in a country that is well over 70% white, if this happens, it is bad for you. They literally say it on state TV. It's coming for you next.
Oh, yeah. Well, you see the right-wing machine kick in, media machine kick in, when you see Trump's poll numbers go south. They kick in with
no position on the Confederate flag.
Yeah, Democratic cities are in chaos right now. Is this what you want from Joe Biden? And they're going to take your country away, and they're taking down the statues. And
crime is rising as they defund police.
Oh my gosh, it's so bad. And they get defunding police. And it's like, and the people who you saw there, for the most part, not them specifically, I'm talking about as a whole, fall for it. They fall for it, and that's why they do things like they want to paint over signs, and they think it's our country. This is the country that we built, even though a rich diversity of people helped to build this country. And many of us, meaning our ancestors, for free, did not get paid for it, could not get an education, could not build wealth, are not on statues, Confederate or otherwise, are not on Mount Rushmore. I think, listen, this is people can pick this up. If they're going to put someone on Mount Rushmore, considering the history of this country, the first black president should be front and center.
Add to Mount Rushmore. Look, I think that's first of all, I think it's a more saleable idea than the idea of taking away founding fathers. And again, all of this is fodder for debate and discussion. You got to have the talk. You just can't hate people from having ideas you don't like. That's the only mistake we can make. And a lot of this, I was talking with my kids about this, and we were talking about slavery, and I was saying we did this, we did that, we did this, and I was saying, now listen, as you're getting context for this, Cuomo's have only been here a couple of generations, but you have to understand we own the history of this place, because now you are charged with what do you do here? What are you about? How do you collaborate in the creation here? Whether it's the pandemic or whether it's the virus of racism, what we do have to do in this country is everybody, you're doing it beautifully and brilliantly yourself. Of course, I'm biased and I love you, but you're using your platform, you've made a choice. You may not be winning yourself a lot of fans, but you're going to say what you think is true from your experience, hard minted for many years in this business and in this country. Yeah. Everybody's got to make a choice about what they're going to do right now. It's a famous song from Rush. Even if you choose not to decide, you've still made a choice. And that's where this president is with the Confederacy.
All right, preach there, Cuomo. Listen, I have to say, it's, many times I do this because I'm not just speaking for myself, but I'm speaking for other people. And I think it's important to give people, as I've said before, we have to cut people a break in this time. People are vulnerable. You've got the coronavirus. They're sitting at home. Some people don't know where their next meal's coming from. They have a tough time with their jobs and on and on. But you can't let people off the hook. So it's tough for many people's ears to hear you say, well, we have to add, we can't change, we can't take it down. When Native Americans would say, well, that didn't happen when it came to us.
True.
And so what's wrong with all of us together thinking or reshaping our country so that more people rethinking our country and the way we think and where our priorities are so that this country belongs to everyone. It's not
Nothing's wrong with it.
It's not just my country.
Right.
Maybe some of the people, I'm not saying that they should, but maybe some of the people up there on Mount Rushmore, who knows? It wasn't Mount Rushmore. If the name shouldn't be Mount Rushmore. If you talk to Native Americans, right, they say it is stolen land. It was only Mount Rushmore 40 years before they started to carve president's face is in it, and no one got any money for that. And the person who was behind that was one of the founding fathers, or was a president.
Was a president.
Was a president, and so
I think that you're totally right. I think the premise is where we're going to have to work towards, which is if we all decide. It's about consensus and collective consciousness. And if you get
the
to
majority of the people aren't always on the right side, though. I mean, look at the civil rights movement. That's so. Just because of,
right, but you got to that point where you got a majority of the country, because otherwise you wouldn't have the legislation. You know, you have to get to a point where the country look, Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. A lot of people thought that was Supreme Court law of the land. People thought that was the end of the discussion. Yeah. Fine, you got equal rights here. We're equal, but we're separate, which was an extension of Lincoln's philosophy, by the way. Then you had Brown versus the Board of Education. Yeah. And it was a whole rebirth of cultural awareness. We need collective conscience. The key has to be the will.
And we need education. I really do think we need education. And I think people need to learn about the founding fathers. As I say, they were not perfect. Doesn't mean that they didn't do great things. I don't like to deify anyone, right? But they were not perfect. Lincoln wasn't perfect. So, you know, people think that Lincoln just said, hey, listen, we're going to free these people, and that he was always on the right side.
Right.
No, he wasn't. There was a lot of wanted to expatriate black people or Africans and send them to colonize them, send them somewhere else, right?
And listen, you are dead right. I was blessed with having a father who was a Lincoln scholar.
Yeah.
And he was piping this stuff into my head since I was a teenager. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, the best thing that ever come out of your Bible was when you said early on in this, if you have a black friend, talk to them. If you don't have one, find one. If you're a black person, find one. That is the key. Because when people start to hear about different people's experiences, things start to change in your own experience, in your own perspective. That's where we got to get to. That's all.
Well, it was this post that was published on social media that got people talking. It was published by Chinese state media, the Global Times. They said that there was a suspected case of the bubonic plague confirmed in China's Inner Mongolian Autonomous Region. That was back on Sunday, urging residents in that region to adhere to the guidelines. Since then, that case has been confirmed, and there has been a wave of articles published about this topic all across international media. And just taking a look at Google Trends, we know that people have been interested about this throughout the globe. Google Trends saying that there has been a spike of over 4,000% of people looking up the term bubonic plague in China, and that becoming one of the most searched terms over the past 24 hours. But here in the Cube, we wanted to know, is there a real cause for concern here about this confirmed case of the bubonic plague? Well, one of the first things we saw on social media was this tweet published by an infectious diseases expert, and she said here that the bubonic plague cases are actually completely normal and expected. And we spoke to Dr. Alexandra Phelan here in the Cube, and this is what she told us.
So bubonic plague cases are completely normal and expected, particularly here in Inner Mongolia. There are regular cases each year. There are even cases regularly in the southwestern United States. Bubonic plague is one of 3 different forms of plague, and it's typically caught from contact with dead animals or infected animals, and is really easily treated with antibiotics.
And let's just put this in a bit of context, because this is data from the CDC, that is the American Center for Diseases Control and Prevention, and you can see these are the cases of the plague from 1970 to 2018 in the United States. Taking a more close look at the numbers here, this is 2000 to 2018, so it does seem to happen quite regularly, although these numbers are all below 20. 80% of these cases are the bubonic plague, but it shows that in a time of a global pandemic, many people are taking on this, reporting this widely, but it's important to put all of this into context.
There's work to do.
To help save lives and to rebuild the economy.
Work we can do from right here.
Right here.
Upwork is giving $1 million in talent grants.
To projects that help to counter the ongoing of COVID-19, lending our expertise in tech, creative,
and operations as the world's largest network of independent professionals.
So you and I were talking back at that house. We were talking during the break about remote learning. I got a 2 and 4-year-old. There's not a lot of it. How is your 10-year-old
possible. We're here to help. Go to upwork.com/worktogether to learn more.
We are a generation that doesn't want to just.
It's what apparently that happened in the 60s with new math. Now, the new math that you and I grew up on is old. And there's something called Singapore math, and there's something called the bar method. There's all these new methods that I have no idea. I don't know.
Oh, it's good to look at and realize that's the frustration that's coming out of my career.
It is coming, so get ready. It's oh Lord.
I just want to say that you hosted the Webby Awards on Tuesday night. I actually hosted.
During the pandemic, businesses are evolving to help limit person-to-person contact during transactions, and they're using touchless technology. You may have seen it, so expect to see signs like this popping up to explain the process as we all get used to this new normal. In some cases, customers can pull up a menu, order, and pay all from their smartphones. Centennial-based Speed Pro is helping to make it happen in downtown Denver.
I think smart signage has been kind of on the horizon for a long, long time. And, you know, a lot of things that we do is the great big graphics, which gives us a chance to really engage clients really, really easily. But once they see it, then they kind of move on. This is an opportunity for businesses, particularly, to get really engaged with their clientele as well.
These are already in place at Denver favorites like Cherry Cricket and One Coop Brewery. More than
President Trump will talk Making America Great Again in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on Saturday. But the campaign has clearly learned lessons from his last rally in Tulsa. There, an expected crowd of nearly 20,000 dwindled to just 6,200. This event will be outdoors at the Portsmouth International Airport, allowing for more social distancing and presumably more people. As for the other health and safety protocols, in an emailed announcement of the rally, the campaign said, quote, "There will be ample access to hand sanitizer, and all attendees will be provided a face mask that they are strongly encouraged to wear." In Tulsa, masks were available but not widely worn. This is a departure from the campaign at a time when cases are on the rise across the country. Now, why Portsmouth? Why New Hampshire? The Live Free or Die state is on the short list for a pickup from the president. He famously won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania with razor-thin margins in 2016. But it's the states he barely lost that he's coming back for in 2020. States like Minnesota, Nevada, and, yes, New Hampshire. Plus, holding this rally in Portsmouth is a stone's throw from Maine, where that state's split electoral college system handed the president one vote. 50% of Maine's counties pivoted from President Obama to President Trump, so he's eyeing that state to pick up as well. But will his message land? Well, it remains to be seen. In a University of New Hampshire survey from June, nearly 2/3 of Granite Staters disapprove of the president's handling of COVID-19. And a mass-scale event, when public health experts warn against them, outside or not, is not likely to bolster those numbers. Even though the president only lost New Hampshire by just 3,000 votes in 2016, polling here puts his opponent, Joe Biden, solidly ahead. But one thing does carry over from Tulsa. Anyone attending this rally will have to sign a waiver absolving the Trump campaign of any liability should rallygoers contract coronavirus. Reporting from outside Washington, I'm Megan Pratt.
Are you wearing the right face mask? And the type you choose can make a big difference in helping to slow the spread of coronavirus.
As ABC's Eva Pilgrim shows us, not all of them are the same. She does have the results on which coverings protect you the best.
With COVID cases climbing, mandatory mask orders are growing. But now, new research concluding not all face masks are created equal.
We were basically looking at two main characteristics for the masks. The first was the type of fabric that we used, and the second was the construction of the mask.
Researchers at Florida Atlantic University put several different masks to the test. They looked at a bandana-style covering, a loosely folded cotton handkerchief mask, a homemade 2-layer quilted cotton mask, and an over-the-counter cone-style mask. They used a laser to detect droplets as they were coughed or sneezed out of a mannequin. This video showing how far those droplets traveled with no covering. The green going about 8 feet. The single-layer bandana, better than nothing, but showing the droplets still traveled pretty far, more than 3.5 feet.
Even the bandana fabric will be able to stop the largest droplet sizes. So if you use a better fabric, it will be more effective.
The loosely folded mask performed better, but the droplets still traveled more than a foot. The best performers, the over-the-counter mask, shielding the droplets up to 8 inches of spray. And taking the top spot, the homemade 2-layered quilted cotton mask, droplets only traveling 2.5 inches.
Masks are not 100% effective. There's always some leakage from the sides. That's why it's important to use a combination of face masks and social distancing.
And that was ABC's Eva Pilgrim reporting. 2 important things to keep in mind. First, the fit. Make sure it's snug around your nose. You'll see a lot of people with just around the mouth, but it needs to be around the nose as well. And the second is the fabric. The thicker, the better.
Harvard just made a lot of news with their plan for the fall semester. Some students will be back on campus, but all classes, every single class will be virtual, and you're still going to pay $50,000 per year, even if your 19-year-old is in their childhood bedroom zooming into class. Harvard can do that because it's Harvard, and other Ivy League schools would claim the same. But higher education runs an enormous gamut, and all sorts of schools have a bunch of very complicated competing interests to figure out ahead of the fall semester. Joining me now, someone who studies higher education, technology, culture, and inequality for a living, has been chronicling what's been going on. Professor Tressie McMillan Cottom, a senior research fellow at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the author of the great book, Lower Ed, The Troubling Rise of For-Profit Colleges in the New Economy. Professor, let's start with these sort of prestige institutions. I think they're kind of an interesting experiment because they're not representative. Harvard and Princeton and the other places, they don't have to worry that people are going to run away from a Harvard degree. All these well, we got to give people the experience. So they're making these choices with a lot of latitude, and it is interesting to me the choices they're making, which are we don't feel like we can bring a ton of people back.
Exactly. What this says to me is that when a school has all of the resources available to it and has the ability to afford the luxury of putting student health and welfare first, they choose to go online. The takeaway there is that all institutions should be able to afford to put their students' well-being and health above profit, above sustainability, above their ability to open and provide jobs or be a local economic engine for people. But not every institution has the luxury of making that choice. That brings up the issue of who should give us the luxury of making that choice.
Well, and so I saw someone comment on this saying, look, if Harvard, with Harvard's resources, is saying, Harvard University says, with all the resources, this is the best we can do for everyone's safety, which is all classes are virtual, we're only going to have 40% students on campus on time. What does that say for every other school? And other schools, like you said, they have to worry that people aren't going to pay the tuition. They're not going to show up. They're not going to have enough enrollment if they're doing Zoom classes. So there's a strong incentive to sort of put butts in the seats, which I really worry about.
As do I, and as do many faculty members, staff members, the people who make up the institutions that comprise higher education in the United States of America are actually quite concerned about the incentives of putting butts in seats. You see those who have faculty unions, for example, at CUNY, are pushing back. Those who are in the position to do so are signing petitions, trying to speak up in favor of putting the health and welfare of not just the students, but the staff members and the faculty members on university campuses. We are more than just the time that we spend in the classroom. Universities are complete ecosystems. They are communities. And if there is a public health incentive for us to social distance, to self-isolate, and to sort of withdraw from some social interactions, then there absolutely must be an incentive for us to do so on a college campus. The question becomes, why would an institution make a decision that does not put a student's health and welfare up front? And that's what we get from the Harvard case, that there are economic incentives for us to choose something other than what is best for the student for the greater higher education campus. This is where a robust federal and state response would be ideal. Harvard can afford to do it. The United States of America can afford to do it for all colleges and universities. We have chosen not to do so.
And we should know that, like, your point there is so crucial. I mean, a huge part of, you and I had a conversation about this on my podcast, and we talked about this before, about, like, what are colleges for, right? What do they sell people? What do they provide? They provide an education, they provide a credential, and they provide an experience, among other things. And a huge part of this is just saying, look, like, the experience is a big part of it. It's why parents, like, scrimp and save, and they send their kids away to have this experience. But if we're saying, look, the experience itself, which is like kids hanging out in each other's dorm rooms and going to parties and being up late at night at the student theater, that itself is unsafe. Like, you can't have the experience. We just got to take that away. And it's not like they're like, it's not like they're 5 or 6 year olds where there's a sort of, you can't really do Zoom schooling with kindergartners. You can do it with the students this age. There should be a workable way to do it.
Well, there is a workable way to do it. There's a workable way to do it for students and for citizens. There is not a workable way to do it for customers, Chris. And that's where we find ourselves. Right. At the third of conditioning people to think of higher education as any other consumer good and to think of students and families as customers, we now have to pay the piper. The customer wants a certain experience. Well, customers are not the right sort of framework to think about the moment that we are in. A global health pandemic is larger than a customer. A global health pandemic requires a citizen response, a public response. The problem is we spent a lot of time starving our public institutions and our very idea of public and citizenship. And because of that, we now have to deal with customers when we would probably prefer to deal with students.
There's also, of course, the best laid plans. Like, no plan is going to survive first contact with an outbreak. I mean, if Massachusetts is 6,000 new cases a day, like, some states are posting right now, like, Harvard's sending everyone home. Like, who are we kidding? So people can come up with any plan they want. If you don't suppress the virus, none of it's happening.
The plans right now, and listen, I'm very empathetic to those whose jobs rely on them producing a workable plan. The thing about higher education, especially public higher education, there are a lot of stakeholders. There are a lot of people that institutions have to satisfy, a lot of political games and political rhetoric that shapes our ability to do our jobs and to operate, particularly when is being undermined. So I'm empathetic to that. But plans right now are really just to manage our anxiety. None of us are able to predict what the virus will do. And I think that is especially important to keep in mind when we also can't predict what our president will do.
Alabama is a state that sends a lot of people into our military. What are you telling the citizens of Alabama about these intelligence reports indicating that Vladimir Putin has been paying to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan, and the White House position that Donald Trump has done nothing about it because they don't think these intelligence reports are worth paying any attention to?
Well, I've been telling folks consistently that is incredibly troubling. I mean, we have enough issues with Russia right now as it is with election interference and all. But now this is something that raises a threat level beyond anything involving elections. And it should be very troubling to all Americans that an adversary like that Russia is creating this kind of atmosphere of fear. And I've been to Afghanistan. I've visited with those brave men and women over there. But what I talk to folks about, too, is because the intelligence reports are a little bit mixed. We're not sure if all the intelligence can agree. But the one thing we know is this, that the commander-in-chief has not come to their defense. And that has been the biggest problem, I think, for me and most folks in Alabama, is why hasn't the commander-in-chief stood up and said, we are going to get to the bottom of this right now, and I'm going to demand some answers from Vladimir Putin and others. That's the big key right now. And it doesn't matter if people can agree to disagree within that intelligence community. The one thing the commander-in-chief ought to be doing is getting answers and letting the American people know that he is getting answers and he will take it. He will take the appropriate action should he find that it was absolutely true.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro announced Tuesday he has tested positive for coronavirus. He said he wasn't feeling well Sunday and then it got worse on Monday. He said he started to feel tired, had some muscle pain, and a fever. He also said he went to the hospital to check on his lungs, which he said came back clean. Bolsonaro, similar to President Donald Trump, has downplayed the virus for months. In the past, he's called the virus a little flu, and at times ignored social distancing and refused to wear a mask. Brazil has the second most number of cases, trailing only the United States. More than 1.6 million cases have been confirmed so far, with more than 65,000 deaths. He reportedly told reporters his medical team gave him hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. On Tuesday, he said he was feeling very well, crediting the hydroxychloroquine, even though the anti-malaria drug has not been proven to treat COVID-19. For Newsy, I'm Stephanie Sandoval.
The Real Techniques Miracle Perfection.
Whatever it is you need, got you. Feeling thirsty? Need something fresh? Bring it out.
All right, thank you, Brad. Tomorrow, if you're heading out in Madison County, don't forget your mask. We're heading into a full day under a new mask order Wednesday. That order kicked in tonight at 5 p.m. It now requires you to cover your face in public places, but what could happen if people don't? WAFF 48's Caroline Platt has that answer.
We're not trying to be the bad guy here. You know, we're going to enforce the law because that's what we're doing. That's the business we're in.
Fred Patterson with the Madison County Sheriff's Office says not following the new mask order is considered a misdemeanor. And they will enforce it on a case-by-case situation.
It is an arrestable offense. Could be a summons there. But is it something that we're looking at doing? No. Am I sitting here telling you that we're not going to enforce that law? I'm not saying that either.
Patterson says if you call the non-emergency line to report someone not wearing one, they will follow up.
The information will be taken. It'll be a report will be generated and assigned to an investigator. And ultimately, the health department may be called to assist in that investigation.
There is an exception for children ages 2 and younger.
If I had to put a mask on her at her age, we would just stay at home because there's no way I could expect her to wear one at her age.
Brianna Halpin is the mother of 19-month-old Maya. She says although she's glad there's an exception for her daughter, she doesn't feel comfortable bringing her inside public spaces at all.
No out to eat, no grocery store, no Target. No. None of that stuff. Anything that she doesn't have to go to, we're not going to take her to.
Patterson says he hopes people do the right thing and wear one.
Wear your mask. We're going to do it. We expect you guys to do it.
Reporting in Madison County, Caroline Clapp, 48 News.
You can find the full mask order with exemptions and requirements on WAFF.com right.
It's a very challenging and hard position to be in. We're making it do right now, and we have more capacity to expand, but it is limited capacity to expand. Our teams are stretched. We are managing it, but we can't sustain this trajectory for many weeks.
Well, you heard the man. In Texas, local officials in several cities, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, are concerned that increasing hospitalizations could overwhelm intensive care capacities, some of them in short order. Today, the state logged new record single-day highs, as we mentioned, in 3 separate categories: new coronavirus cases, deaths, and hospitalizations. Texas added over 10,000 new cases. That beats Saturday's record of over 8,200. Today, their total was fully 1/5 of the new cases in our country. Coronavirus hospitalizations more than doubled in the last 2 weeks. For more, we're happy to welcome to the broadcast Roberta Schwartz. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Innovative Officer at Houston Methodist, a healthcare group with multiple hospitals across the largest city in Texas. Also serves as the COVID-19 Incident Commander. Roberta, thank you very much for coming on. I'm afraid I have a flurry of questions for you. How bad is it there tonight? What kinds of patients are in your ICUs? And if I needed an ICU bed tonight in Houston, could I get one?
So in all of Houston, the number of cases are growing quite substantially. Every other day or so, we have a little bit of a flattening, but then the cases start going up again. Right now, in our hospitals, we have over 750 patients in our hospitals, and that number, unfortunately, keeps growing. We have many more medical type of patients than we have ICU type of patients, but both patient groups are growing at pretty rapid rates at this point. When I go into the hospital each day, we're turning yet another unit or yet another set of beds into COVID patient beds. I will say that for whatever condition you have, if you come to the hospital, you will be taken care of. And it may be that you have to wait a period of time to get into a permanent bed, but today we are able to take care of all of the patients that are coming to the emergency room. And we are very concerned that people don't wait and not come to the hospital if they need the care, because we are taking care of them.
Well, may that remain the case. As you're talking, and you're the latest person to talk about wards being converted on the fly every day in real time as patient numbers rise, does it strike you you're living a little bit of New York mid-April?
There's no doubt that the stories that we've heard from New York are in my mind every day when I walk down a hall and we take a unit from kind of an open unit where the staff would just be masked and would be treating patients like normal to what I call a yellow unit. And a yellow unit is when the hooks go on the door and all of the PPE come out. For us, our gowns are yellow color, and because they're yellow color, I call them yellow unit. One of the issues that we have, and when you think of New York, is at some point the demand outstripped the number of beds and the number of staff, and the staff were certainly stretched to take care of the patients. Today, I don't believe we're in that scenario, but if we don't get the behaviors correct in this state, and that includes the masking, the social distancing, and the hand hygiene, and really being absolutely diligent on each one of those issues, I do fear that we will end up in the position that New York was in.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC.
Yeah, I think we're excited to be here today. Anytime you get to meet the president and vice president and some of the White House team, to be able to really give your opinions from the state level. And one of the great things about working with this president, he's been very open to listening to our needs on the state. So I want to make sure we're on the same page. One, that we can reopen our schools in our state with our local guidance, for one. And two, that we make sure that we're moving forward, because opening those schools is part of opening up the economy and making sure people get back to work, making sure that our jobs are starting to be filled out there again, and again, make sure our kids are safe and they get them back into the system of learning. And that's so important for the future. So I'm looking forward to that, looking forward to having a chance to tell the president the views from Missouri and to see what they're doing, what they're thinking here in D.C. Yeah, I think one thing, I think we got a lot of great administrators in our state. We got a great DESE program there for our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. There's going to be a lot of people who understand you're going to have to reform the classrooms to a certain area. You're going to have to practice social distancing, good hygiene. But, there's a lot of things in classrooms now that you could look at sometimes maybe as clutter, then maybe that comes out. So we practice social distancing and make sure the kids know that, if they're sick, if they don't feel well, maybe the best thing for them to do is stay home on that day. But again, all of that is part of getting the economy going back and getting the states back open, and that's important to me. And I want the president to know that today, and I want him also to understand that, on those schools, I hope are left to the local levels where we feel like they are best suited to make those decisions. Yeah, I think that's all things we're all discussing. We know fall's coming up. We know football's big, especially when you get in the southern part of the states. For us in our state, just wherever you go, football's big in the fall time. But again, it's all the other activities that go on that, whether it's band, whether it's sports, whether it's glee club, whether it's speech club. How are you going to make sure that those kids get those experiences they need? And I think those are the things why we're here today, learn as much as we can through the summit they're having today, to make sure we can take that back home and implement that for our schools. So all the information you get right now, we're all going through something we've never been through before. So as much knowledge as you can gain to be able to take that back home and move forward for those kids this year, that's why I'm out here today. Yeah, it doesn't change the opinion of what we started out before. Again, whether the positive cases go up or not is not, without taking in the hospitalization, without taking in ICU beds, without taking in the ventilator situation, all of the factors that go along with that, it's definitely a misread if you just talk about the positive cases all the time. And we know that in Missouri, and we've known that now for some time. And we feel very comfortable about opening the schools back up, opening our economy back up, which we did several weeks ago. We're just going to keep moving forward. I think Missouri, you can see we're improving every day when it comes to testing. We're testing more and more every day. Contact tracing, we're going to get better at that every day. But all those are keys moving forward, and almost all the states know that, so we're all moving in that right direction. I think what people just need to understand, you just can't take one number, which is COVID-19, the positive test, and get the total reaction out of that. And I think that's the spin that's being put on that. And we need to really go back to the facts and to see what's really happening in your states.
I just spent the weekend cruising up the Sacramento River up there in the Delta, so thank you as always for your time. Curious, as we were bringing you in here, we were really noting the big outperformance of big tech, but really being led by just a few of the big companies. How are you thinking about this market? What parts looked overvalued, and how toppy it feels given the rallies really being led by fewer and fewer companies that just get bigger and bigger?
Yeah, the narrow leadership is definitely concerning. We've seen that in the past. If you go all the way back to the 80s and the 90s, it has happened. And it doesn't mean that the market's going to correct on those names. Usually the rest of the market comes back up and those names kind of go steady. This time I'm not so sure. I mean, those stocks are stay-at-home stocks. And this is a health crisis. At some point, we're going to resolve that health crisis. And people are going to look at those valuations and question, are they going to keep going through the roof? So the narrow leadership does concern me. Look at the value stocks. I mean, value stocks are negative year to date. It is really, it's not just growth. It's these handful of growth companies, as you mentioned.
Where, therefore, in value can you start to look? Or where is there ripe for opportunity? We've only got 45 seconds and we have much more with you in a moment.
Well, really, it is all about backing up Caroline and looking at asset allocation and how are you going to mix your portfolio. You really just can't shift between value and growth at this point. I think there are too many risks on the horizon. It is really a big concern about this market.
Welcome back to Chatter, everyone. Some regulators and advocates are concerned about Google's next steps after its purchase of Fitbit. European Union regulators, particularly, are investigating whether the deal would force rivals out of the market. And 20 advocacy groups have signed a statement voicing privacy and competition concerns. Joining us now is Alex Harmon, who is the competition policy advocate at Public Citizen, one of those groups. Alex, great to have you here with us today. Help us break this down. Now that the U.S. is looking into this, or rather the EU, I should say, is looking into this deal, do you think that officials are taking these concerns seriously?
Oh, for sure. And Australia has also looked at the case and has put a pause on it. And the Department of Justice in the United States, they took the initial announcement late in November, and they asked for additional information, which is their way of saying we want to take a closer look. So we're looking at least a year on the domestic side, in addition to Europe and Australia taking a much closer look.
And so, particularly, what have you highlighted within this deal that presents competition issues?
Sure, and what we like to caution is this is not a traditional consumer product question, right? So the idea that Fitbit as a wearable device and Google not a dominant player in the wearables market,